Well, I think at the height of the pandemic, as you said, in maybe late 2020, early 2021, there were something like 111,000 different travel restrictions around the world in force. Currently, I think there are some 25,000, so quite a dramatic drop, but still quite a significant number of restrictions.
These are complicated rules that range from entry bans on particular countries, arrivals from particular countries, to health requirements, quarantine requirements, surveillance requirements. More than 100,000 still in place prior to the Omicron outbreak. And what's striking about that is it is still making it hard to understand where you can move to on a short-term basis or a long-term basis. It's making it hard to navigate rules. It's creating this kind of labyrinthine, complicated system that you have to, be very knowledgeable and resourced to navigate. But it's also about the way that the right to cross borders was recalibrated in the course of the pandemic. So I think it's fascinating that somebody can be prevented from boarding a plane because of a negative test, even if they're a citizen of the country that they're traveling to. Even the right to return has become so squeezed. And that has been a real shock, I think, for people who were in possession of a passport of an affluent country. The idea that these free movement rights that you take very much for granted are all of a sudden very, very conditional. But it's given us a little bit of insight into what it's like to come from countries that do not face the same liberty to kind of travel to different countries because they face challenges getting a visa, or perhaps because they don't even have access to a passport. Movement has always been deeply unequal, and free movement has never been a right in the way that people understand it and can actually tangibly touch it for a lot of the world. So I think it's been interesting for those of us from affluent countries to get a little taste of some of those inequalities, or at least the conditionalities in the way that we understand the right to move.
The key thing you see when you look at West African migration is that, unlike the media images, the political narratives, which seems to suggest an exodus of Africans, and particularly West Africans, to Europe and North America, this is far from the truth. So if you look at the movements, the statistics in Africa just show that about 67% of Africans move within Africa. And when you come to West Africa, it used to be about 10, 15 years ago, it used to be as high as even 84%. The current statistics is around 74% of all West Africans moving actually do move to another West African country. And then another 10% or so move to other regions of Africa. So we've talked about the ECOWAS Free Movement Protocol. This was developed in 1979. What it does is it guarantees free movement of persons within I think we have 15 ECOWAS countries. So closure of land borders, and they are still closed. For many countries, Ghana's at least is still closed. Travel restrictions, initially lockdowns, which affected all categories of people, all those issues around social distancing. Increasingly now, the travel restrictions, travel ban, now you're having vaccine mandates and so on. Many of these have had an impact on mobility for a region that is so highly mobile. So during those times, for instance, a lot of West Africans were caught, stranded, in borders, and so on. There were some people tried to, go through using illegal means. Even up to now, some people still try to go through illegal means, and they are often arrested and deported. And this is surprising given the fact that you have a regional free movement. And these are ECOWAS citizens. But unfortunately, with COVID now, national policies appear to rather, bear weight compared to regional policies. So I think IOM, for instance, estimated about 20,000 West Africans were stranded initially I think by June last year or so, when these mandates were put in place. Many people were stranded.
But I think if you look at Schengen, for instance, there have been increasing uses of additional checks in the Schengen area, particularly in response to large-scale migration movements since 2015. But I was looking a little bit further back at some of the reasons that any of the of additional restrictions have been placed in internal border checks in the Schengen area. It's interesting how in the 90s it was because of big football events or because of concerns about the Hells Angels bikers in Scandinavia. Then, sometimes because of big conferences, but then you start seeing security and terrorism become more of a concern. Paris attacks, we saw in internal border checks. And then there was, a huge burst in how they were used in response to the 2015-2016 so-called migration crisis. So I think that the seal had already been broken on internal borders within Schengen and additional checks there. But it was interesting just how kind of comprehensive those restrictions on internal movement were.